All right, this one's going to be a super personal one. So if that's not your cup of tea, move on. No hard feelings. So I've been dealing with some health stuff the last 4 years, and I've been dismissed, and then finally now I have some doctors taking me seriously. And I got a diagnosis just a few weeks ago that was a hard one to hear. Not life threatening or anything, but chronic and definitely life altering. One of those that impacts several different areas. And I kind of fell apart. And part of that was the very natural, just grieving some of the things in my life that it looks like I may have to give up. That's just, it's hard to come to terms with that, especially as a relatively young, active, healthy, generally person. But the reaction that I was having was outsized to that. And it took me a little while to unpack it. But in doing so, I also came to a realization that has surprisingly been quite healing. So, a little backstory. So, first, just kind of the bare bones of my story. My ex husband, we were together 16 years. He abruptly left me with a text message. And then I had, after that, realized that he had married another woman. Yes, bigamy. Had committed marital fraud or financial abuse. Had been living a double life for years. All of those things. And when I discovered the bigamy, I contacted the police because that is a felony. And he was arrested. And he was bailed out of jail the next day. And that day, he attempted suicide. Now, before doing so, he sent a letter. It was an email. He sent it to my mother and to his other wife. And in that letter, he laid out 3 reasons for why he had done all that he had done and what was leading him to this suicide attempt. And those reasons were that I am too difficult, that I am impossible to live with, that I'm too much for anybody to deal with. Number 2, that I spend too much money. He went on about all of these things that I, quote unquote, had to have and that he couldn't tell me no. And then 3 was my health. And he blamed me being sick frequently. At that point, it was sinus infections, on how hard it was to be around me and how I was restricting his life. And so with this recent diagnosis, I realized that it triggered this fear in me of my now husband responding in that same way, or feeling, even if he didn't respond that way, deep down feeling those things about me. Even though he had never said or done anything in that way. But then there was a secondary of, oh my goodness, almost all of the arguments that I get in with my now husband come down to my core belief that I am too difficult, that I spend too much money, and that I'm not healthy enough to love. Wow, that was an eye-opener. That damned email sent 13 years ago was now that voice in my head telling me who I am and telling me how other people see me, even though that was one person's words. One person's words that, in retrospect, were complete projection and manipulation. But yet, reading those, it's so hard to separate that I know that from how that feels, how those words feel. And what was so amazing, though, is in that moment when I realized that what he had said in that email had somehow become my core beliefs about myself, even though They weren't in conscious memory, even though that wasn't something that I routinely thought about. It was like a switch. It was like, oh, that's where all of that is coming from. And none of that is true of my now husband. None of that is frankly true of me. And now I can see that for what it is. And it's been amazing of just this almost lightness after that realization of I can put that away now. That letter doesn't matter anymore. I no longer have to live by what he said about me. I am the one who gets to write those words.